Welcome to Shares from the American College of Financial Services, where money meets minds. Here's a look at what we'll be sharing with you today.
This is a perfect example of a very obvious miss that I think that anyone that has done this for a living knows better, and why he's been, talking about 8% withdrawals for over a decade. He just needs to move on.
I'm Michael Finke, Director of the college's Wealth Management Certified Professional Program, and your host for this conversation on specialized knowledge. I'm joined today by two of my fellow college faculty members, Adjunct Professor of Wealth Management David Blanchett and Professor of Practice Wade Pfau. Gentlemen, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. Now let's get started by, first of all, Wade, I know a little bit about your background. How did you get into retirement income planning in the first place?
Oh, well, great question. And it was actually somewhat of an accident, and maybe based on public policy. In the early 2000s, there was a conversation around making personal accounts out of Social Security. I was analyzing that, and really what I was doing with that later translated into retirement planning. And it started with just a personal interest in how am I going to plan for my own retirement, but realizing I had this skill set that became useful for understanding just different retirement income approaches and so forth.
Now, David, I know that you actually started out as a practitioner, but you're one of those people that just can't stop learning new stuff. So what is it about retirement income planning that drew you to the research in this area?
So, maybe I blame my parents. They were both public school teachers, and so they instilled in me this value of knowledge. I think that, when I was learning more as a young practitioner, I just started asking a bunch of questions, right? And I think some questions, no questions have easy answers, but, if you save 20% of your pay, you're going to end up in a good spot. But I think that where things got really complicated was the goal itself, like how much you've got to save to retire. And so I've kind of lingered in that space for a long time just because, there isn't one answer for everyone. And I think that helping individuals figure out how to more successfully accomplish retirement, that's the biggest lifetime financial goal. So it's been kind of this constant challenge that I guess I just enjoy researching.
In a way, we kind of lucked out in our careers that we started doing research in financial planning in this area at a time when most American workers were transitioning from a system where they had a employer, there were somebody that was an expert that was collecting their money, investing it, and then letting them know how much they could spend for the rest of their life, moving into a system where they were going to have to do it themselves or with the help of a financial advisor. And we're all trained as economists, so we have perhaps some different ideas than practitioners do when it comes to how to approach this problem of saving money for the purpose of living in retirement, and then spending it down in a way that's enough to live well, but not running out of money. So, Wade, tell us a little bit about your educational training. Where did you come? Why do you have the perspective that you have when it comes to retirement income planning?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that academic training as an economist, you learn about the life cycle finance model. And I always remember the economics professor about maximizing your utility subject to your budget constraint. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day is there's scarcity. You have limited resources. How are you going to allocate those resources over your lifetime to get the most lifetime satisfaction? And with the basic problem of saving for retirement. When you're working, you're going to have plenty to spend from your income. When you're retired, you're not going to have anything to spend. And so you need to save a portion of your income while you're working to cover those retirement years. And you want to try to smooth your lifestyle over time. So this, when you start talking about the practitioner-based approach, it may often start at retirement, just because a lot of people aren't thinking about this until they get to retirement. But if you can take the step back and look at it from a more formal academic perspective, it is this idea of spreading out the resources you have so that over your lifetime you can enjoy a stable and high standard of living.
So David, you were educated, I know you were, about this life cycle stuff when you got your PhD. Can you explain it to a practitioner, and how does looking at retirement income planning through the life cycle lens, how is that different?
Well, maybe just taking a step back, I think that the way that the vast majority of Americans and financial planners view retirement is through a series of basic decisions, right? Like I want to have income for life for 30 years, like, and I want to achieve a certain success rate. And, you know, those models aren't wrong. They're just overly basic, right? I mean, like the reason that you save for retirement is so that you're not broke when you retire. It's somewhat obvious, but, you know, saving for retirement comes at a cost. And the goal of like life cycle finance theory is that, you know, this idea we're going to make the optimal choice all throughout our life cycle. And it's not, it's a great theory, but, you know, people have to make choices when confronted with uncertainty, and that kind of can radically change the way that you think about these problems, because, you know, not only do we not know how long we're going to live and what markets are going to do, but we don't know who we're going to be in 10 or 20 years. So I think that, you know, while we create, you know, I think very good models or ideas to kind of think about this problem, life is so fundamentally uncertain, it's really hard to even do a decent job modeling all the stuff that could possibly happen.
No, I think that this is one of those things where there may be a difference in perspective between those who care a lot about things like habits and, you know, building financial habits that are going to lead to greater. And there's also this sense that the more money I have, the better off I'm going to be. Now, that really does fly in the face of the way that economists approach it, because for an economist, it's all about balance. It's saving for the future is giving up spending today. That means that if I tell my employer I'm going to be saving 15% of my income, that's less money I have for going out to dinner with friends or for going on vacation. There's always that trade-off, that sort of balance of spending the money after retirement and spending the money today. And oftentimes the economic approach is like, how do you balance that appropriately? And what are the characteristics that would affect that? As you said, David, there's so much uncertainty to life. And in fact, this is one of the points that was made by our friend Dave Ramsey. Now, there was a certain amount of controversy a few months ago about whether or not Dave Ramsey's approach to retirement income planning was in any way accurate. So one of the things that Dave Ramsey said was that you should be able to safely withdraw 8% of your retirement portfolio every year. And he made it seem as if having an opinion that was different than that was dumb. And in fact, he called people who had done research in this area and were overly pessimistic and thought that maybe a safe withdrawal rate was closer to 4%. He had a term for them. Do you remember at all what that term was?
Wasn't it goober supernerds?
It was goober supernerds, and I think at this point we should reveal that we are in fact proud of the fact that we are super nerds. Now, why is it that we're such a buzzkill when it comes to this idea of how much people can safely spend from their retirement portfolio? Why is it that 8% isn't realistic?
I mean, I would just add, we're not buzzkills. He just can't do math, right? So like I've been through Financial Peace University. I have taught FPU. So I really do believe a lot of the behavioral stuff that he talks about can help individuals make better decisions, okay? But like there's some very simple concepts that exist around things called like arithmetic and geometric returns, right? Volatility negatively affects the growth of wealth over time. And, you know, he talks about earning 12% on stocks over the long term. You're not going to earn 12% on stocks over the long term. You're going to earn 9, maybe 10%, absolute best case scenario. So he's saying that you can get to 8% by saying you're going to earn 12%. You're going to subtract 4% for inflation and end up at 8. Like, that's just bad math to begin with, because you're going to only earn 10%, like best case scenario. Then you tack on things like volatility, and it just all goes haywire. So, like, to me, it's really important, this conversation about why I didn't like it. We like it. It's not this idea of he's speaking to individuals about behavioral science and better outcomes. He just doesn't seem to grasp some very basic concepts around retirement income planning. I'll let Wade weigh in.
David made a very important point here, Wade, and that was that volatility matters. Now, explain to us why volatility matters.
Well, yeah, and in getting into the conversation around volatility, the other part of that 8% rule idea was, and implicit in the discussion here, retirees would be holding 100% stocks throughout retirement. And so he's thinking about averages. If you have an average life expectancy and you get the average market return every year, yeah, then maybe an 8% withdrawal rate would work. You're going to die before you run out of money. But we can't use those averages. And so there's volatility in how long you're going to live. And there's also volatility in the market returns that you're going to receive. And that's when we talk about, we were lucky getting into retirement income planning, really when it was an emerging field, because risks are different in retirement. And with market volatility, if I'm spending from my assets, it has an inverted impact. We talk about, like, if you're saving for retirement, you can actually benefit from a market downturn because when you put your new savings in, you get to buy more shares, and over the long term should be better off. But that reverses when you're spending in retirement. If there's a market downturn and I have to meet a fixed spending obligation, I have to sell more shares. And then even if the overall market recovers, which hopefully it will, my portfolio doesn't recover. And that's where volatility has this impact that he's completely glossing over. And that's where he gets, well, anyone who's worried about volatility or compounded returns or anything else is that goober or super nerd living in their mother's basement. And I don't think it's nerdy to just reflect on the reality is, following that sort of advice, a lot of people are going to end up running out of money because they don't have the purely average experience that he has in the back of his mind with the sort of spreadsheet model where you get the average stock return every year and you live to an average life expectancy of maybe age 80 to 85.
But it's still the wrong average. He's still using the arithmetic, this simple average return in his calculations. He should be using the geometric average, and that would mean out of the gate, it's 6%, not 8%. And I'm more okay with 6%, but 8% is just absolutely nuts because you're not even using the wrong average return for the calculations, which is like investments 101. Like, if you don't know the difference between geometric and arithmetic averages, you shouldn't be giving advice, period, on anything related to portfolios.
Which is why all advisors should take a course at the American College of Financial Services where they can learn valuable concepts like that.
The American College of Financial Services, championing causes, connecting communities, delivering best-in-class applied financial knowledge and education
for the benefit of professionals like you and for the benefit of society.
Expand your opportunities at the all-new theamericancollege.edu.
You said something about 5%, maybe 6% is the right withdrawal rate. Now, I'm going to, at this point, remind everyone that Wade and you and I have all written that, first of all, if you follow the 4% rule to the letter, then there's probably an unacceptable chance that if you experience a bad sequence of returns, you're going to run out. However, nobody's ever going to do that. And nobody who starts to run out of money is ever going to just blindly continue to spend a fixed amount adjusted for inflation. If you see your money dwindling, you're going to cut back. And that aspect of retirement income planning, the cutting back, is one that I think we have all accepted as part of the way people should do it right. That they should pay attention to new information. And I think advisors do this anyway. They say the 4% rule is the right approach, but then they get a year like 2008 and they cut back, or they recommend that their client cut back on their spending. The client's certainly willing to cut back on their spending because it just feels wrong to continue to spend the same amount after you've lost, say, 25% of your portfolio. That flexibility, that element, is such an important part of retirement income planning. And this is related to a concept that Jonathan Guyton put together, I think a few others, 20 years ago, which is that you can use what's known as a guardrail. You can be somewhat flexible. So, David, what is a guardrail strategy?
Yeah, a guardrail is just acknowledging that, a guardrail exists within a retirement plan projection or concept where if the market goes down, I might spend less. If the market goes up, I could spend more. It's just introducing a dynamic decision in retirement. So a lot of the early research on retirement spending by Bill Bengen and others used static assumptions. And actually, most financial planning tools today still use static assumptions. They assume you're going to kind of literally, every year in retirement, call up your advisor and say, hey, inflation last year was 3%. I'm going to spend 3% more. Well, what Guyton, I think, and all of us have talked about this before, is just the idea of I'm going to introduce in models this idea of flexibility. I'm going to say, hey, the spending is going to adapt in retirement based upon some set of conditions. And the most common condition in our models is return. So if returns are less than we expect or they're negative, maybe the person cuts back. But if they're higher, they could actually spend more. So the idea behind guardrails and other methodologies that are dynamic is just to kind of account for how households kind of on average are likely to respond to changes in the value of their portfolio.
We have this concept of the 4% rule where your spending adjusts for inflation every year, but that really maximizes the sequence of returns risk or the volatility impact, because as soon as you allow for the possibility that if there's a market downturn, I can cut back on my spending a little bit, not sell as many shares. That's a really important way to help manage the sequence of returns risk. That allows you to use a higher initial withdrawal rate potentially because you have this built-in flexibility to cut back as needed. And so it becomes a really important practical consideration where, yeah, the 4% rule as strictly defined may not be safe, but if you build in this capacity to be flexible with your spending, then you can use a higher initial withdrawal rate. And I mean, just another point related to this too is the whole issue of taxes. And I think that's really important to emphasize. The 4% rule, where you're always spending the same amount every year, it's a pre-tax number. It ignores taxes. And when you look at how the tax code works, you're not going to have inflation-adjusted constant taxes. Your taxes won't just grow with inflation every year throughout retirement. And so setting everything else aside, this idea that you want the constant spending every year, with the way the tax code is, you're not going to have after-tax constant spending. And so there's some built-in flexibility there where if the market's down, you may have the potential to realize some losses or whatever the case may be. You may not have to pay as high of taxes as well. And that becomes a way to help offset some of that volatility risk without necessarily impacting your after-tax spending as well. So, but the idea of having flexibility goes a long ways towards helping to improve the ability to sustain your assets in retirement.
Another wrinkle too is just the composition of the household balance sheet, right? And almost every American, every retireed American gets Social Security retirement benefits. They're linked to inflation explicitly, right? Spending though doesn't tend to increase every year as a constant proportion with inflation. It tends to go down a little bit on average. And so when you think about those offsetting effects, you're kind of getting a lot of what you increase your spending in retirement via Social Security, so it creates a more nominal type of need from the portfolio. So again, when you kind of layer on all these conditions, flexibility, retiree spending, all these things, you start to introduce, higher initial withdrawal rates than you might get if you use a very kind of conservative, restrictive model, which is what the 4% rule is based on.
There's another problem with the 4% rule, and that is that you ignore those retirements when you get lucky. And one of the aspects that I think is particularly attractive of a more flexible spending strategy is that you get to adjust up. So you take risk in the first place so that you can live better. And if you get lucky and you take risk and you earn a higher than you expected rate of return, why should you not then have the ability to adjust your spending upward? And is it a significant loss if you don't have a very strong bequest motive? And we don't see a lot of evidence from the research that people really have a super strong bequest motive. They want to pass the money on to others. Why not allow them to spend the money while they're still alive? And even if they are charitably inclined, why not allow them to give the money away while they're still alive? And this is, I think, something that's not talked about enough in financial planning.
Yeah, I mean, so there's ways that you can introduce like bequest motives in determining optimal withdrawal strategies. Like, let's just say that it's 0. No one cares if it's 1. They care, equally to the utility they derive from income. I think it's like 0.25 on average. Like, there's something there, but it's really low. And so I think that the idea behind dynamic adjustments, it allows you to capture that. A point that I always make is that people don't put all their money in cash all the time, right? People put money in the markets and they know that there's risk there because they're making an active trade, right? Every day we make hundreds of active trades around risk about how fast we drive, what we eat, do we exercise, all these different things. And I understand why earlier models that existed 20 or 30 years ago really didn't allow for this idea of, I'm going to figure out what is the right trade in terms of the risks of cutting back on my consumption retirement versus maybe spending more. But I worry that like the way that we relay retirement around like success rates that are binary and all that don't accurately kind of, relay what is the likely kind of distribution of outcomes, that cone of outcomes. Like if things are bad, what does it mean for your consumption? But if things go well, what does it also mean on the upside? So I think like the issue is just kind of helping frame that distribution to retirees versus using kind of overly basic and restrictive models.
And something else that's worth just pointing out as well, when Bill Bengen developed the 4% rule back in 1994, he was actually just explaining why Dave Ramsey's logic was wrong. And so we've known this for 30 years at this point. But that it wasn't meant to be a retirement income strategy. And I don't think many advisors are necessarily just telling their clients, here's the withdrawal rate you can use. Now go enjoy. Really, to the extent, now the software may have issues because it still may report things with a probability of success, which isn't telling the full story about the distribution of outcomes. But at least most financial planning software allows you to budget in different expenditures at different points of time in retirement and can layer in Social Security and can layer in required minimum distributions and how that can impact the tax picture and all the different aspects so that you don't have this constant inflation-adjusted spending throughout retirement within your financial plan. But that's really, in real life, a much better way to approach. Now, the software can be improved, but it's not just strictly applying any sort of withdrawal rate. It's allowing for a realistic look at how expenditures may change over time, how other income sources may change over time, and so forth.
Well, let's talk a little bit about spending and whether or not it does make sense to spend the same amount after inflation every year. Now, we talked about the fact that people might have to adjust downward if the markets don't do well. You should maybe allow them to adjust upward if the market does well after retirement. But to what extent should people overweight spending between when they retire and say age 75, the early part of retirement? Because it seems to me that that's when I can get the most enjoyment out of the money. And do you agree, David, that it does make some sense to front load your lifestyle rather than preserving those assets as much as possible to make sure that when you're 95, you can spend the same amount of money as you were spending when you were 65?
I think it does. I think what's really important is everyone is different, right? We all have different preferences around what are the things that we would consider to be like essential versus discretionary. What is the pain that I would feel if I have to cut back? But I mean, there's lots of evidence that on average, people as they age, they slow down, right? There's a really fun model like the go-go, the slow-go, the no-go years. And so I think that one thing you don't want to do is you use really, really conservative assumptions. Like I'm going to plan for a 99% success rate that I'm alive at 110 and not enjoy your savings when you're in your 70s, for example, when you're relatively young in retirement and can actively enjoy it. So to me, it's that balance of saying, hey, there is a possibility you might want to go out and do things when you're 90 years old, but you might not have the ability to actually do so because of your health. So I think, finding ways to kind of front load spending while not kind of imperiling the portfolio is a way to really create a more balanced retirement based upon how individuals are likely to enjoy it.
Yeah, and it's not just the biology of as you get older, you're just not doing as many active type traveling around the world and so forth, so you tend to naturally spend less. But economic theory really points to that as well. The simple life cycle finance models usually assume you live to some age, long-term age, capital T. But then like Moshe Milevsky's looked at that and built in, well, what if you don't know how long you're going to live? And so this idea of longevity risk aversion, you're always going to have this pattern where the optimal solution is to plan or intend to spend less at a more advanced age because you're not even sure if you're going to be alive at that point. And so to create the most overall satisfaction out of life, now it's just how much of a tilt you have there. Some people are more worried about outliving their money, so they'll have less of a tilt. But at the end of the day, it does make sense to anticipate spending more early on when you're alive and healthy and know you can really enjoy it, and anticipate spending less later on because you don't even know if that later on will happen.
Wade, I know you are cited as being the guy who says that maybe it's not a 4% rule, maybe it's a 2.9% rule or something like that. That would suggest that you're saying that people should only spend $29,000 the first year of retirement if they have $1 million saved up. And so you're kind of saying that maybe that's not what you mean.
Well, I think we were co-authors on some of that work, but I do think this is a function of where interest rates are. Now, I know that there's some people that disagree with that, but I think when interest rates are lower, it's really the yield curve tells you how much you can spend from a bond portfolio. And then if you want to add an equity premium to that for stocks, maybe you can increase the number, but nonetheless, you're starting from a lower base. So that 2.9% type of withdrawal rate was calibrated more to when we had the TIPS yield curve, the Treasury inflation protected securities that tell you a real interest rate you can earn with inflation on top of that. There's points in our recent past where the entire TIPS yield curve was negative, and that would suggest lower sustainable spending. So that's more where that 2.9% number would come from. What you need, the 4% rule assumes 30 years. You need a 1.3% real return to make the 4% rule work. Now the TIPS yield curve is above that. It's more in the ballpark of 2%. It even, in the recent past, got as high as 2.5%. That makes it much, much easier for something like a 4% rule to work. If you're strictly following all those assumptions of spending is going to grow every year for inflation. So I think 4% is a much more reasonable number today. And then, like we were talking about, if you build in the capacity to be flexible with spending, you may increase it even further. Now, you do have to consider other factors that aren't in the 4% rule either, such as investment fees. The 4% rule assumes you earn the index market returns. The 4% rule is assuming a 30-year time horizon. So for early retirees, or today increasingly for people in their mid-60s, 30 years may not be a long enough planning horizon. There's some other factors to consider, but no, I do think in today's interest rate environment, we're not really talking about a 2.9% withdrawal rate anymore.
I would agree with Wade. I think that I view the 4% rule as a very conservative estimate. So it's someone who has really, really low flexibility around any kind of future changes. They want a high level of certainty. Right now, it's 4-ish%. If we go back a few years, it was definitely 3%. Right now, that's a certain case, a certain profile. I think it's as you acknowledge more things, as you introduce flexibilities, you introduce capacity to cut back, as you introduce things like guaranteed income and all this, like that's where you move from, say, 4% today to, say, 5% or 6%. Again, it's just how do you weigh those trade-offs between, if you have to make a change in the future, are you okay with it versus being able to spend more now and possibly later?
So explain to me, Wade, why can't you, because right now you said I can go build a TIPS ladder up to the age of 95. I can withdraw then, more than 4%, maybe net of fees, around 4% every year up to the age of 95. Why don't I do that? Is that truly a no-risk proposition?
Yeah, and there's a handy website out there now called tipsladder.com that I just checked it today as we record. 4.5% would be a sustainable 30-year inflation-adjusted withdrawal rate. Now, the downside of doing that, you could go out and purchase TIPS maturing. Now, there's some gaps, and so it's not quite that simple, but basically build out 30 years worth of bonds maturing each year to support around a 4.5% withdrawal rate. Now, sometimes people who have a very investment-focused mindset will say that means, of course, 4% is safe, but the 4% rule is not assuming a 30-year TIPS ladder. It's assuming you hold a diversified investment portfolio of 50 to 75% stocks. And that's where the sequence of returns risk could lead to a situation where you don't yield as much out of your investment portfolio as the TIPS ladder yields. So if you do take the TIPS ladder route, you're giving up the upside growth potential that a diversified portfolio would provide. You're really locking in, this is what I can spend. And then you also have to deal with the reality of there's a potential to live beyond 30 years. So if I plan my assets out precisely to spend them down to zero in 30 years, that's these retirement income bond ladders assume you spend your portfolio down to zero at the end. So if you haven't taken a portion of your assets and put them into a QLAC to cover your late in life spending, you will ultimately not have money to spend. Of course, now this is just in the investment context. You have Social Security and whatnot. but your investments will fully deplete after 30 years with your 30-year TIPS ladder.
So David, let's talk about guaranteed income for a moment, because as economists, we have a different idea about this concept of using annuities or guaranteed income as a way to protect yourself against the possibility that we don't know how long we're going to live. Now, I've got my QLAC cap because I'm an economist, and we realistically know that there's going to be, I don't know, like 20 people that will actually buy a QLAC. So it's not really a practical solution. It is, by the way, a tax-favored way of, in your qualified account, buying a deferred annuity that might kick in as late as, say, age 85. That's, to an economist, they love that concept. You're cutting off the tail of longevity risk. You're doing it when those mortality credits are the most valuable. But talk to me a little bit, David, about how I think advisors are beginning to soften their perspective when it comes to annuities, because annuities can do something that, despite what Kingfisher says, other investments can't do.
So, you said the A word. You got to kind of caveat things here first. So, A word being annuity. I think that, as we're talking about annuities, in this context, it's really important to define, because like the word annuity is the most, it means so many things in this industry. It's products that provide, I define it as protected or guaranteed lifetime income, right? And an important thing here is like delaying claiming Social Security is one way to do that, or you can purchase a product that provides that kind of income for life. We used to have these things called defined benefit plans. They did that too. Those are kind of going away. But I think that really anyone that has studied this topic in the last 50 plus years has kind of acknowledged the fact that when you don't know how long you're going to live, you don't know returns and all these other things, pooling that risk together can result in more spending or more income over your lifetime. Right, so fundamentally, there's this benefit to risk pooling around uncertain things, buying insurance. And an annuity, or delay claim of Social Security, or a defined benefit plan, it's a way to buy insurance that allows you to spend more in retirement. And there's some interesting structural risks with annuities and what's happening, but by and large, I think that those of us that have said, hey, advisors need to be aware of this, is that you can't solve longevity with a portfolio. You're just talking about TIPS ladders and 4.5%, but like the problem is Wade alluded to, is like, well, what if you live 31 years, then you're broke? And so I think a lot of advisors approach retirement more as an investment problem. It's really kind of, a lifetime problem, where the only way to really provide certainty around longevity is buying or allocating to products that provide that more explicitly. And that's where annuities or delay claim of Social Security, or taking that income benefit from a DB plan, those are things that help with that I think not only have kind of like the base economic benefits around increasing spending, but also can make individuals a lot more comfortable just to spend in general, because they don't have to worry about going broke at age 95 anymore. So there's tons of benefits there that have been talked about for a long time.
Wade, this idea of annuities, there's a lot of controversy, and a lot of people will say, well, hey, you guys are motivated by the annuity industry. We're puppets. We're pushing this product that is evil, that is not necessarily in the consumer's best interest, that's had a lot of complaints to FINRA. This is true, that in the sense that I think that the insurance industry has not really focused on the true value proposition in many ways of an income annuity, which is taking away the risk that when we do retirement income planning, we don't know how long we're going to live. Now, David and I have done some research that shows that people spend more when they have wealth in the form of a pension than when they have wealth in the form of investment assets. Explain to me why that is. Why is it that you would feel more comfortable spending the money if you had shared that risk of not knowing how long you were going to live with other retirees?
Yeah, well, there's really two alternatives if we build a TIPS ladder, we build a bond ladder, but if you want to spend more than interest rates will allow for, you've got two choices. You can build that diversified portfolio and rely on stock market growth, or you can use the actuarial science of risk pooling through an annuity that can allow for a higher level of spending than bonds as well. And they're competitive with each other at the end of the day. And so it's ultimately, what are people more comfortable with? And for the majority of Americans in general, they can feel more comfortable spending when they have these contractual protections that say, okay, I've contributed to the risk pool. I've taken the risk that if I end up not living very long, I will contribute to those in the risk pool who live longer. And that will ensure that should I live a long time, I will be able to continue to spend. And so I can go ahead and enjoy and spend. And I know these checks are coming in every month for me to be able to spend, versus the other approach where I'm relying on the stock market. Now, some people are okay doing that. But if I'm relying on the stock market, I always have this sense of, what if something goes wrong and my assets deplete, I run out of money? I feel like I can't spend today because I have to protect myself, and I have to rely on the stock market to support that future spending. So it is easier in many cases to rely on contractual protections to support your spending than to rely on uncertain financial market outcomes. And I think that's a big driver for those findings in terms of having this license to spend. You have a contractual guarantee that you will receive income for the rest of your life. You can go ahead and spend every month.
Yeah, I mean, I'm to the point where I'm a firm believer that, a lot of advisors will say, well, my clients are really well funded. They don't need any more lifetime income. And I honestly believe, like, if every American had their essential expenses covered with lifetime income, they could enjoy retirement more. So to me, it's almost beyond kind of the economic argument of, like, let's talk mortality pooling, to let's just talk about how you're going to be able to enjoy retirement more if you're less concerned about, the market going down 30% and you can't pay rent anymore. And so I think that what's really important is that most of the research on the value of annuities, to kind of be blunt, is around the economic benefits. And that's pretty obvious. But I think it's actually the behavioral stuff that can make it even more valuable for advisors. And that's the stuff I don't think that we have talked about enough, because that's the stuff that's harder to quantify, but I think to some extent matters more.
Yeah, I think ultimately, sometimes we forget what the whole goal of this thing is. The whole goal is, the money is just an input. The money is an input in helping us get the most out of retirement. And the less we worry about it, the more likely we are to simply spend the money without feeling as if there might be a risk. So, if I spend a lot, if I live well today, is there a risk that I'm going to potentially run out? If I can get rid of that risk, if I can transfer it to an institution, are people actually going to live better? It's an interesting question. And I think that's one of those questions where the research is really going to point us in the right direction about not just what is optimal theoretically, but what is actually helping people live better. Well, I think we've established today that we are, in fact, super nerds. And if we think about why someone like a Dave Ramsey would tell people that they can spend 8% of their savings every year in retirement, and he is the expert, and he says it very confidently, and he dismisses anybody who disagrees with him. Why would he do that? What is his motivation for that? And as a caveat, I will say that I have followed some of these retirement boards, and there are people who shop around for financial advisors. And they will say, well, I went with this guy because he told me that I could spend more every year, or that I was going to get 10% return on my portfolio, and this other guy said I was probably only going to get 7 or 8% return on my portfolio. I went with this person. Why do people do that?
Yeah, I think it's like this idea of it's the marketing team versus the actuary or super nerd team, that within financial services, there's this sense of people don't know what's going to happen. So and they don't necessarily fully think through all what's going on, so that when advisor A tells them they can earn a higher rate of return, or advisor A tells them they can spend at a higher rate, like if Dave Ramsey says you can spend 8% and this other advisor says you can spend 4%, I think a lot of people might think, well, that 4% advisor, he must just not be very good. Let's go with the 8% guy, because that guy seems to know what he's talking about. And so that it creates this kind of arms race where the advisors who can promise more, it's easier for them to create business or to pick up opportunities to find new clients. And then ultimately, whether or not that advice works out, we're not going to know for 20, 30 years down the road. That advisor is not probably going to be around by that point. And so they're not going to be there to bear the responsibility for. Now, sometimes the clients will succeed with that sort of approach, but a lot of clients are not going to experience the promises to work out in the way that advisor suggested. And that's, at the end of the day, people just go for those easy promises rather than really thinking hard about the reality of the situation.
I don't know. I mean, I want to say it's the expression, you just can't help stupid sometimes. I mean, like, he should know better, right? Like, I don't know what the driving factor is, but he's been saying stuff like this for a decade. And again, like, I really like a lot of the concepts he leads with, and he really helps people, I think, do a great job, get out of debt and make better choices. But why can't you just know basic investment arithmetic and not talk about arithmetic returns? So I don't have a good answer why he does it, but I think it does kind of create a situation where if it sounds too good to be true, unleash a little bit of Google skills and just go online and kind of see what other people say, because while we'd like to trust the quote-unquote experts, sometimes they get it wrong. And this is a perfect example of a very obvious miss that I think that anyone that has done this for a living knows better, and why he's been talking about 8% withdrawals for over a decade. He just needs to move on.
I think one of the criticisms of Dave Ramsey that doesn't really get discussed enough is that he does play off the emotion of his audience. And I think his audience likes to make fun of the idiot that overspent, that has a problem with sticking with their budget. And that sort of negativity is, it resonates, but, and people like to hear it. They like to put someone down who's doing something that's worse than them, who's not following the habit of thrift. So part of the joy we get from listening to Dave Ramsey is listening to him berate all these people who have made financial mistakes. But on the flip side of that, he is then lionizing the people who are saving and saying that they're going to get a promised land that's even better than the super nerds think they're going to get. So he's going in two extremes, both of which play with the audience. And I think that that's fun if you're an audience member, but it's not necessarily helpful, and it can lead to worse outcomes. And I think, honestly, it can lead to worse outcomes on both ends. It can make people who are in debt feel worse about themselves, and it can make people who are saving feel like that they can do something that the money can't actually do. David and Wade, thanks again for spending time with us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise.
See you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
That's all for now, but you can find all our episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other streaming services. Be sure to like us, follow us, and leave us a rating and review. Shares is a production of the American College of Financial Services, and we hope you join us next time as we share ideas that expand your opportunities.